Okay, so it's been a while since I've uploaded a regular non-complaining about something video. And as much as I love complaining about things, that's not what this channel is supposed to be about. Although I could complain about YouTube some more. I do quite enjoy it. Anyway, it is 2023. It's almost 2024. It's December 1st. So we got, what, 1 month? And then it is going to be 2024. And I have no idea why I'm talking so slow. Possibly just because I want to extend the video. Anyway. I have completely lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, it's 2023, and there are no original ideas, and everyone on the internet does the same exact thing, at least for the most part. So I figured we would make a tier list. Now, let me go ahead and pause this real quick. Hopefully that was the correct key to pause the video, and it didn't just record all of that. Anyway, I don't have a face cam, or I can't, I could, but I don't know, I'm not going to, is what I'm trying to say, cut the screen in half and put Subway Surfer, running on a loop at the bottom of the video. So if you get bored watching this video, you can't just look down there and watch it. I understand it's 2023 and people have short attention spans. According to my Google Analytics, by this point, most people have stopped watching. So let's go ahead and get into it. I couldn't use the actual... There's a website for this thing, but why are you opening in such a small window? But I couldn't get that to work, so I just made my own in Microsoft PowerPoint. I want to apologize ahead of time. What the hell? Oh god, there's Clippy. I want to apologize ahead of time. My cursor, I can barely see my mouse cursor. Whenever I record my screen, it like flashes and I can barely see it. So if sometimes I can't click on things properly, that's why. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into it. We'll start off with the first one, Windows 1.0. Now, I don't have a different one for each version, like 1.0, 1.01, 1.1. I don't have that. I've just got Windows 1.0. And we're just gonna say that's Windows 1 just to cover all the 1 point whatnots. Now, I really don't want to give this a poor rating. Just to go over it, S is like, I don't know what the hell it stands for. Superior. That's what I'm gonna say. Then you got A, B, C, D, and then I don't know why it's an E. That should probably be an F, so we're just going to call that F. Anyway, I hate to give the original one a poor rating, so I'm not going to. However, it is a very rudimentary, primitive sort of operating system. Looking at it these days, I suppose it was a lot better than MS-DOS, but it still had a long way to go. I'm going to put this somewhere. I'm going to put this in between B and C, sort of right about there. And yes, I can. I'm going to put them in between. Now see, this pops up. There we go. Okay. Windows 2. I think that's 2.0. I can't even see. Windows 2.1? Was there a 2.0? I don't know. Anyway, that is beginning to get a little bit more matured. God, I can't talk. Anyway, it's getting a bit more developed. It has actual icons. The File Explorer is a little bit better. I'm going to put this one in a solid B. Now, Windows 3.1, now this says Windows 3.11, but 3.1, same difference, is where it really started getting great. Windows 3.1 was very user-friendly, at least for the time, and it had like real icons. You could open multiple windows, and things actually opened as windows, whereas before it sort of opened as like a whole screen type thing. You could click on an icon, open the application. I'm going to put Windows 3.1 in A. And I'm going to try to resize it here. Like I said, I can't really see my cursor that much. No, damn it. Windows 95. Now, Windows 95, when it came out, was a big deal. And rightfully so. It was the first time that the start menu showed up, as well as the taskbar, and basically the way Windows is today. We still have a taskbar down at the bottom. We still have the same, relatively the same start menu, although it is starting to go away on newer versions of Windows. And I hate to give Windows 95 a low rating, because it is the beginning of modern Windows, if you will, as in not the of course it's still MS-DOS based, but it's the first version of Windows that had the taskbar, the start menu. I'm trying to say it's like the first version of Windows that was really its own operating system instead of being MS-DOS Executive, which is what the earlier versions of Windows were called. So I'm going to put Windows 95 in... I'm going to try to put... Come on. I'm going to put Windows 95 in B as well, because it still needed some help. Now, there was Windows 95A and Windows 95B. I'm just going to put this as covering both. The later version of Windows 95 fixed some of the stuff, but it was still sort of buggy. It's a decent operating system, but personally, Windows 98 is where it's at for Windows 9X for me. Windows 98 First Edition was also sort of crappy, but I'm going to count Windows 98 Second Edition. I'm not going to count it as a separate operating system. So when I say Windows 98 here, I'm referring to Windows 98 Second Edition. Now, for today's use, that is the most popular version for, like, oh, retro computer gaming or whatever. Windows 98, though, Second Edition, had decent USB support, which you didn't have before. It was relatively stable, and people used it for a long time, especially with Windows Millennium Edition, but we'll get to that in a minute. So I'm going to put this in A tier as well. Now, Windows 2000 Professional and Windows Millennium Edition came out both in 2000. Windows 2000 Professional came out a little bit before Windows Millennium Edition, and Windows 2000 Professional... I should start by saying I did not cover Windows NT, NT 4.0, or any of those, because those were not mainstream releases of Windows. Now, Windows 2000 Professional, I'm going to consider that a mainstream release of Windows, even though it's still a Windows NT version, and it's not... It was a professional-only version with no home edition. I'm still going to consider this a mainstream version of Windows, because it really is. Windows 2000 Professional was built on NT technology, as opposed to Windows 98, and basically everything before it was built on MS-DOS. Now, NT, I forget exactly what they say it stands for. Some people say it stands for New Technology. I forget what it actually stands for. Anyway, it was the first mainstream version to be released on NT technology, which is more stable. It has a bunch of other, what do you call them? Geez, I am not talking clearly today. It had a bunch of other, good things. I don't know the word I'm looking for here. Anyway, NT technology was the way of the future, and that is still what we use today. Windows 2000 Professional is going to go up in the S tier, because it truly was a great operating system. However, Windows Millennium Edition, which was basically the home version, was completely different. Windows Millennium Edition was released in 2000 as the home edition of Windows for the year 2000. However, unlike Windows 2000 Professional, which was built on NT technology, Windows Millennium Edition was still based on top of old MS-DOS technology. It was basically Windows 98 3rd Edition, if you will. It did add some nice features such as System Restore, which has helped me out a few times, at least back in the day when I was running Windows Millennium Edition. However, it also disabled some features, such as being able to boot straight into MS-DOS, although you could regain that ability. I forget exactly how, but I've done it before. On top of that, Windows Millennium Edition was known for being unstable, slower, or not slower. Some people say it was slower. I've actually used Windows Millennium Edition for a while, and it's actually slightly faster, but not, like, really. But it was known for being unstable, having blue screens, having all sorts of issues that I have personally not experienced. My first computer ran Windows Millennium Edition, and I used it for several years before upgrading to another computer, and Windows Millennium Edition never gave me, nor the person who originally owned that computer, a problem. However, most people will tell you Windows Millennium Edition was a flop. Windows Millennium Edition, while in my mind is not a terrible operating system, is sort of hit or miss. Some machines run it well, some machines don't. Some things run well on it, other things don't. But for me, the biggest problem with Windows Millennium Edition is that there was no improvement, for the most part, on top of Windows, instead of Windows 98, which is why most people either upgraded directly to 2000 Professional or stuck with ME, stuck with 98. So I'm going to put ME in a C tier. Up next, we have Windows XP. Do I need to say anything else? Windows XP was a big deal. Windows XP, much like Windows 2000 Professional, was built on NT technology. However, unlike Windows 2000 Professional, Windows XP was released in a Home Edition, and a Professional Edition. The Professional Edition, of course, being for professional users, and the Home Edition being for home users, which is the first version of Microsoft Windows for home use that was built on the NT technology. It also allows you to run some... It has a compatibility pack. You can run MS-DOS programs within reason on it. Now, I will say that when Windows XP first came out, it wasn't that well received, and it was not the best. Around Service Pack 2 is when Windows XP really started getting better. And, of course, now, Windows XP is, well, Windows XP for many years was the most popular version of Windows out there, and it is still run by many people to this day. There are people who still use Windows XP to this day, even though it is, let's see, it was released in 2001, so it is nearly, let's see, 22, nearly 23 years old. However, there's still a plethora of applications and stuff that support it. Many people still run it to this day, including the United States military. Many ATM machines and a lot of businesses still run an embedded version of Windows XP. It is just simply stable, and it simply works. And if you couldn't tell, I just so happen to be one of those people who still uses Microsoft Windows XP. Up next, we have Windows Vista. Now, Windows Vista was not well received either. Windows Vista was basically Windows 7 before Windows 7. Or I should say Windows 7 is basically Windows Vista that's been improved upon. Windows Vista was a bit buggy when it first came out. However, it got fixed relatively quickly. The reason Windows Vista, in my opinion, had such a bad reputation was because of Windows XP and the computers that were running it. You see, Windows XP is a very lightweight operating system, and most computers running Windows XP were something like a Pentium 4, or even at that time, people were still running Pentium 2s and 3s, and they ran Windows XP just fine. However, if you tried to install Windows Vista on them, it would run, because Windows Vista only requires like a 1 GHz processor and 512 megabytes of RAM as the system requirements. However, in all actuality, it needs at least 2 gigabytes of RAM and a dual-core processor to run properly. So the reason Windows Vista ran so terribly when it first came out, or one of the reasons, there were some bugs, was because people were trying to install it on their computers that were, well, at the time, they were okay, but they were running Pentium 4s and had like 512 megs of RAM. They ran XP just fine, but they would barely run Vista. This led to people hating on Vista and not wanting to use it. Most people stuck with XP until 7 came out, or even afterwards. Windows Vista was buggy. It did have a bunch of unneeded crap in it that was removed in Windows 7. For example, that sidebar. I personally like Vista, but I'm going to put it in between C and D. Up next is Windows 7. As mentioned, Windows 7 is basically Windows Vista that has been, what am I trying to say? Perfected, streamlined, something like that. It's basically the same operating system, but it was released in 2009, 2 years later. By then, a lot of newer computers were able to run it, and it just had most of the bugs already worked out. And it was a really decent operating system. A lot of people call Windows 7 the best operating system that Microsoft ever released. And just like XP, there's still a ton of people using Windows 7, even though it lost support 3 years ago in 2020. Personally, I don't think Windows 7 is quite as good as Windows XP. On the right hardware, I've seen Windows 7 just sit there and grind on the hard drive and take forever to do anything, just like Windows 10 will, but we'll get to that in a minute. Windows 7 for me is going to go upper A tier, not quite on the same level as Windows XP. And Windows 2000 and XP are about the same, but I'm going to have to drag Windows 2000 down just a slight bit. Put XP up there a slight bit more. Only reason is because Windows XP was a home and consumer version as well as a professional version, whereas Windows 2000 was a professional-only operating system for the most part. Consumers could still buy it, but it wasn't designed for them. And Windows XP was just more perfected, and more stuff ran on it. Now, Windows 8 is a very polarizing operating system. You'll have some people who love it, and you'll have some people who hate it. Personally, I don't love it or hate it. Windows 8 had a very weird design. It was designed for tablets, but it ran on desktops, and for desktop PCs, the user interface was horrible. The start menu took up the whole screen, and it was just not a pleasant user experience for the desktop or laptop user. It was really designed for touchscreens. In Windows 8.1, which when I say Windows 8 here, I'm just going to call this Windows 8, and Windows 8.1, I'm going to call the same operating system, even though they're technically different releases. Windows 8.1 is basically the same thing, but it returned the button you press to open the start menu. However, it still had the full screen start menu. Having said that, Windows 8 is still a relatively stable operating system. It's stable and it runs well. So I'm going to put Windows 8 right about here in D tier. It wasn't great, but it wasn't horrible. Windows 10. When Windows 10 first came out, I actually used it for a couple of years before switching back to XP. And in that time, and running it on multiple computers, I came to realize that Windows 10 is absolutely abysmal. Not only is the user experience still poor, and you have things like the start menu and the the settings menu and the control panel, which are just completely unfinished, even though the operating system's been out for nearly a decade at this point. It still feels like an operating system that is in the later stages of beta testing. It is it is an abysmal piece of software. It is horrible. It is the most unstable, garbage operating system I have ever used. Windows XP goes as low as possible in the Windows 10, not XP. Windows 10 goes as low as possible in the F tier. Windows 10 is a complete garbage operating system, and if you are using it, I feel so bad for you. Especially if you think that it's okay, because it is not. You've got updates that break everything. You've got unstable, horrible. It is the worst. It is garbage. I don't know how anyone uses it and doesn't drive themselves nuts. Windows 11 I have never used. However, from what I'm hearing, it's basically the same thing as Windows 10 under the hood. They've still got the weird settings and control panel, which, once again, seems like something that would be fixed before the late stages of beta testing, much less an operating system that's fully released. On Windows 10, like I said, it's been released for nearly a decade. There's absolutely no excuse for it. Windows 11... other things, when you right-click, it has a weird menu. You have to go to View More or something like that. And it basically is Windows 10, but they've changed the design of it once again. But this time, instead of looking like whatever the hell Windows 10 is trying to look like, it looks like a cheap Chromebook. Now, I don't personally want my computer to look like a cheap Chromebook. I don't want to use cloud computing or any stuff like that. I can't tell you if it's as unstable or as abysmal in that respect as Windows 10 is, but seeing as it's the same operating system for the most part, it's probably just as unstable and abysmal. It just has even worse design elements, and also the system requirements basically make it so you have to have a brand new computer to run it. So Windows 11 honestly doesn't even deserve to go on here, but I'll put this in the lowest tier of F as well. Supposedly there's going to be a Windows 12 coming out. I don't have too high hopes of that, but that has not been released yet. So there you go. There is our tier list. In the S tier, we have Windows 2000 Professional and Microsoft Windows XP. In our A tier, we have Windows 3.1, Windows 98, and Windows 7. Windows 7 is sort of in between S and A. In our B tier, we have Windows 2.0, and we have Microsoft Windows 95. In our C tier, we have Windows 1.0 in between B and C. We have Windows Millennium Edition. And in between C and D, we have Windows Vista. Now, do I believe Vista deserves to be that low? Not really, but most people probably would. I'd put Windows Vista maybe slightly below Windows 7, but just because of the reputation it has, that's where it's going to go. Windows Millennium Edition, like I said, hit or miss with that one. Windows 8 is going to be in the D tier, not because it was necessarily a bad operating system as far as functionality goes, but the design elements and the user experience of that operating system as far as the user interface goes is just abysmal for regular PC users, so that's why that is ranked that low. And then in the F tier, in the bowels of hell, we have Windows 10 and Windows 11. Windows 11 because it just looks and feels horrible. It looks like a cheap Chromebook, and it is got those ridiculous system requirements. That would automatically fail it in my mind. And then Windows 10 because it is the most abysmal, horrible, unstable, unreliable operating system ever. and it breaks itself with its own updates. So there you go. That is our completed tier list. Yes, Clippy, go ahead and save it. Sure. What are you... Okay then, Clippy, I don't want to save it. Just go away. And Clippy... Okay, there we go. Anyone remember Clippy? There we go. That's our completed tier list. I have a real video about a radio that I recorded about a month ago. I need to go ahead and edit that and upload that, but I just don't feel like it. So, in the interim, here is this video. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching. Maybe if you did like this style video, I'll make another one, but I don't expect this video to perform too well. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.